Continuing in the Gospel of Luke with the Sermon on the Plain, we have these words. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house who dug deeply and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against that house, but could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house. This is the end of the Sermon on the Plain, and Jesus has been, in the Sermon on the Plain, been giving crazy instructions. You probably recognize some of these words from the Sermon on the Mount, which is the more esteemed version that we find in Matthew, a slightly different version. There are a lot of great similarities in Luke's, but the Sermon on the Plain, he's been giving crazy instructions. He's been doing the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, and then the woes, woe to you who are rich, woe to you who are hungry, woe to you who are happy, and woe to you who are well respected. You know, this is actually very tough stuff to understand how we intentionally live out the spirituality of Jesus, of the gospel in our everyday lives. And then he goes on, he talks about don't judge others. Anyone an expert at that? I'm not an expert at that. Forgive others. Anyone an expert at that? Be merciful as God is merciful, who is merciful even to the wicked. He goes on, what else does he talk about? Good tree bears good fruit, a bad tree bears bad fruit. And he gives a couple other things. He says, if someone hits you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek, right? Or if it's the left cheek, turn the other cheek. And he says, if someone demands your coat, take off your shirt and give it to him. And if someone begs from you and takes everything you have, don't ask for it back. Well, that's just kind of stupid, right? This is the problem, is that these are crazy instructions. And we've been talking about how Jesus gives crazy instructions. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about what it meant to be an expert. I mean, we're experts, right? We know how to live. We got wisdom, but Jesus' wisdom seems awfully different than our wisdom an awful lot of times. And who do we trust? Do we trust ourselves and our own wisdom, or do we trust Jesus and Jesus' wisdom? Do we keep our feet firmly planted in the material world, of which we're all pretty decently doing? Or do we kind of jump off this cliff, and I perceive it as kind of a cliff, into this crazy world of God's kingdom, which seems, quite frankly, a lot less substantial, a lot harder to live in, but where Jesus certainly seemed to have lived in himself. Because he gives instructions that to the material world, to the physical world, to our world, can be pretty hard to do. Like loving your enemies, what good is it if you're kind to people who are kind to you? Even sinners are kind to people, are good to people who they love. No, be good to people who aren't good back to you. Now that's just crazy talk. God has a long history of giving crazy instructions, though. There's a judge by the name of Gideon. Way back in the Old Testament, before we had a king, there was a judge named Gideon, and Gideon didn't want the job, but God needed someone to lead the army against a foe. And Gideon accepted it because he tested God. He didn't know if it was really God talking to him. He's like, you certainly can't mean me, God. I'm nobody. I don't even know if you're God. And God says, all right, test me. Now, it's always usually a dangerous thing to take up on, but Gideon did. He put some sheep's wool outside. And he says, listen, if in the morning the dew gets the wool wet, but the ground is dry, then I'll believe it's you. Well, it did, but he still didn't believe him. He goes, okay, anyone could do that. I'm going to put the wool outside again, and if the wool is dry, but the ground is wet, then it's you. And it was. And Gideon's like, okay, I guess you're God, and these crazy directions of yours are what you actually want. And what God wanted was Gideon to lead an army of I'm going to get the numbers wrong, 200 soldiers against 10,000. Anyone know the numbers? I'm looking at some of my Bible people. Some of you know the Bible. You grew up in Methodist or Baptist or Independence. I mean, I know you. If you knew if you didn't grow up as disciples, and it's crazy. It's like you want me to lead 200 people against 10,000. It's crazy talk. Crazy talk. But it maybe doesn't get any crazier than when God told Noah to build an ark. He goes, listen, there's a flood coming. There's a flood coming. I'm going to open the windows of heaven. Remember, the ancient worldview is that the blue sky is the water, and open the windows of heaven and turning on faucets, and the water is going to deluge for 40 days and 40 nights. There's going to be a flood. We're going to kill everything off. It's going to be a new creation. It's a great story to tell your children. And I want you to build an ark. I want you to build a big boat. And I want you to fill this boat with all the animals of the world, sets of 2 or 6, depending on which story you read. And it's all going to be amazing. And Noah's like, you're crazy, man. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You want me to build a boat? My in-laws already think I'm stupid. Now what they're going to think about me? What are the townsfolk going to think when you build this big boat? This is crazy. These are crazy instructions. God gives crazy instructions. And he continues with Jesus. The Sermon on the Plain and the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount and other parts of Jesus' teaching are really hard to follow. They're really hard to follow. And they're going to make you look different. And people are going to question your sanity. Because what do you do when someone strikes you? There's not many parents I know who teach the same thing I teach. I tell my kids, if someone hits you, take it. Don't you dare hit back. You can take that blow. It's nothing. It's nothing in the long line of life. It's nothing. You don't need to swing back. Most parents are like, you don't start it, but you stop it. Right? That is a very common thing. I'm like, no, you don't start it, and you take it. Put your hands behind your back, walk away if you can, run away if you can. You got nothing to prove. If you listen to these scriptures, I mean, think about the political dialogue about being tough and being strong and being powerful. If someone hits you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. What Jesus is doing in this specific examples is he's talking to people who are powerless, who don't have a lot of personal, political, economic power. These are the people who have come to him, remember, at the beginning of the sermon, come to him because they need healing, and they need to be liberated of possession. And those things, even if you started out high, diminish you. You get tragic illness, things happen in life, you're going to start falling down the economic, political shame ladder, and you're going to end up near the bottom. These are people who don't have a whole lot of personal power in their life, and these examples are given to people who don't have a lot of personal power. Back even in our day, what do you do when you have power over someone else? Is you backhand them. How do you abuse a woman? You backhand her. It's the image that we have, and it was even more common when status was a bigger deal in life than it is today. So what do you do if you get backhanded? You know what you're supposed to do, because the person who's doing the backhand has the power, and the person who's being backhanded doesn't. You know what you're supposed to do? You cower. If you get backhanded, you cower, and you're reinforcing the roles. I am nothing before you. And what Jesus is telling these people who have no power, I want you to stand up, but don't strike back. Now that's just stupid. How is a person who already has to reinforce their power such that they need to backhand you likely to take that resistance? You're trying to redefine the role. Jesus is telling you, I know that you are worth it. I know that you are an equal to them. Stand up and show them you are. How do you think that person... They're just going to cold cock you in their knee, in their groin, or they're going to get their thugs to beat you over the head with a metal pipe. It's crazy talk. How do you think the people who have no power are going to hear Jesus' instruction? Oh, I'd love to do that, but I ain't going to do it. Someone sues you for your cloak. All right, so what's going on in the second example might be you've made an investment, you need help, and they sue you for your cloak. In Jewish law, if I understand correctly, they can take everything from you but the clothes on your back. All right? So someone takes your coat, which keeps you warm, might be the only thing you got to sleep in, and what you're doing is you're taking off the rest of your clothes and you're throwing it at them. Because to see someone's nudity is a shame on them. Right? You're shaming them. So someone who has more power than you, you're now trying to shame. You're saying, Shame on you for doing this to me. We might be in an agreement, and you might even legally have the right, but shame on you. What is that person going to do now? Are they going to respect you for shaming them? You're already powerless. The last example, which is in Luke, is a different example than it is in Matthew. In Matthew's example is if someone makes you walk a mile, walk two. And the idea that seems to make sense is that a Roman soldier can make you carry their pack for 1 mile. Remember, Israel's occupied. A Roman soldier can make you carry their pack for 1 mile, but if you refuse to give it back, and they're trying to get it back from you because they might get in trouble for making you walk more than 1 mile, the idea is that you make it a dangerous thing for them to impress your labor and the labor of others. In all these examples, including the begging one, you're demanding equality, respect through either resistance, shame, or fear. And it's spoken to powerless people. Powerless people are just like a lot of us. They have resentments, and they have people they don't like, and groups they don't like, and politics they don't like. And so what Jesus is saying, that's a really hopeful message. Listen, even if you don't do it, God knows that you are worth something. But that's not where he ends up. That's not the only thing he says. He also says things like, love your enemy. Well, who are these people? Who are the powerless people's enemy? It's the people in power. It doesn't have to be Rome. It can be the rich neighbors. It can be the successful Jewish person who is suing them for their coat. The people who are causing them the pain are the same people Jesus is now saying, I want you to love and to forgive and to do good for. His teaching both lifts up the powerless and also demands a lot from the powerless. Maryland, I heard an interview this week on a case that had gone to the Maryland courts, and what it said was that felons, people who committed really horrible crimes and who had life sentences, if it was between the years 1981 and 1985, anyone hear this report? Had to be released because the way the law was interpreted was wrong. And they interviewed both the felons who had murdered people, who were now released, and the families of the victims. That's just tough stuff, man. That's just tough stuff. And the family of the victims are like, this is just so wrong. This is so wrong. They took my loved one's life, and now they're walking free. They should be dead, but at the very least, they weren't supposed to have a life. All of us, even if we agree with that, what the victim is going through, makes sense to us because it's what's called the law of retaliation. You know, we have Our Lady Liberty, and she's holding what? She's got a blindfold because it's supposed to be fair. She's got a sword, I think, right? She got a sword. She got a. What does she have? It's a tablet. Well, what I'm thinking about is this thing. Well, she's got a balance, right? She's got a scale. So whatever else she has in her other hand, someone inform me. But she's got a scale because justice is supposed to be equal. Law of retaliation. I'm not sure the Jewish community made this up, but they certainly proponed it. It's like, if it's an eye for an eye, a limb for a limb, a tooth for a tooth. No matter how rich or how powerful you are, it's equal. This is pretty intrinsic within human society. But all the things Jesus is saying in this sermon totally disagree with the law of retaliation. You have to acknowledge how hard this is. Love your enemy. Be merciful to them. Do good to people who hate you. You want me to build a boat? And then notice what he does at the end. Because he's a genius. Notice what he does. He uses a flood metaphor. He uses a story about a flood. How are you going to be saved from the flood? I mean, he connects for us how crazy the directions are with the amazing story and the crazy directions given to Noah and the flood. How are you going to resist and live the flood? And he says, the people who, everyone's calling me Lord, they're all impressed by me, Lord, Lord, But when you have a Lord, you're bowing down before that person. You're saying, command me, direct me, give me directions. Everyone's calling me Lord, but no one wants to do what I tell them to do. He knows how difficult these directions are. He says, the people who actually do what I tell them to do are going to be like the person who built a house on a solid foundation. And the people who don't are going to be like people who built their house on sand. And when the flood comes and the pressure pushes against it, it's going to wipe that life away. You've all seen images of houses that are floating down rivers that used to be roads, or pushed against bridges, nothing but destruction. In Noah's flood, we knew what the water was. It was literal water. What is the flood that Jesus is talking about? What's the pressure? What is it that's causing the pressure that Jesus is talking about? Is it dealing with corruption? Is it dealing with brokenness? Is it dealing with other people? Is it dealing with wrong and tragedy and evil? Is that what the pressure is? What kind of person are you going to be? Are you going to be the kind of person that's just washed away, that's totally swept away whenever life gets tough, whenever it doesn't go the way you want it to go, whenever you don't have power? Is it going to just push you over? Or are you going to be rooted on something solid as God's love for you? And that's the connection point. He says, be merciful as God was merciful to you. That's the hinge. Instead of reacting and responding to whatever anyone does to you, slaps you, steals from you, takes from you, impresses you, makes you do something, and then you react to that, have a solid foundation and react to only one thing in your life, and that's the grace that God has given you. That is the solid foundation from which you act. Jesus only gives a couple examples of what that looks like. And I think they're examples to indicate what a life looks like that is solidly rooted in the reality of grace that all of us have received. How that's interpreted in our life is more complicated. But we should be, Christians are to be, and should be seen as and felt as and perceived as a people of grace. Here's what often happens, though, is that people and communities first perceive grace, and then they feel righteous. There's lots of communities out there, and my goal isn't really to pick on a lot of other communities, but I'll just leave it general. And lots of people who kind of protect their need for grace or their broken heart with steel plates. All right, so imagine you have a broken egg. Like, personally, I think we're all cracked eggs. And we need God's grace. And we protect those broken eggs with steel plates. We rivet them together. All right? And we become self-righteous. And when you're self-righteous, when you're protected by steel plates, the love of God can't get in. And heart can't get out. And you're all good and kind and nice until someone does something that you don't like or that really challenges you or you think is wrong, and then you knock them upside the head with your steel-platedness. You ever been there? You ever felt that experience? You ever heard of that experience? Oh yeah, we're all nice and we all love one another except for you because you're stupid. And that's what it feels like. And Jesus knows you cannot protect yourself. You cannot become self-righteous. You cannot think for one moment, I'm good. I'm good. Every Sunday we come not to confess that we're good, but to confess that we're loved. That's a completely different reality. Every Sunday we remind ourselves, I have been given incredible grace, and incredible grace I need to give. It is the broken heart, when it remains broken, that the goodness of God flows through. It has to stay merciful. It has to stay humble. It has to stay broken, or the goodness of God can't get through it. That is the foundation of our lives. How that's lived out is complex. And there's disagreements. And there is definitely accountability with grace and standards with grace and standing up. I mean, Jesus was encouraging people to stand up for themselves, but be graceful. That's hard to do. That's dangerous to do. That's crazy talk. But grace is crazy. Grace is one of the craziest religious ideas there has ever been. St. Paul's contemporaries, the other masters of law, the other teachers of the law, the other Pharisees and zealous people and rabbis like him knew how crazy grace was. They write to him and say, they talk to him and say, Paul, this grace stuff is crazy. Yeah, God's a forgiving God, and yeah, God loves everyone, and yeah, God's merciful, and yeah, God's awesome, but that doesn't save you. What saves you is following the law, of working hard and being disciplined and seeking purity. Having standards for yourself and for your family and for your community, that's what saves you. Man, if this is what they write, if you just believe, if you continue to preach that we are saved through faith by grace, that's just a license to do whatever you want, to be whatever kind of person you want. In fact, they say, if grace is so good and God loves to give grace so much, people should just keep on sinning. They should just keep on being the horrible, broken maniacs that they are, doing whatever they want, because God's grace just comes more and more. This grace stuff is crazy talk. And Paul says, you don't get it. You don't get how powerful grace is. Because when you really experience it, when you really experience your brokenness and need for God and God's eternal love, it becomes a supernova center of gravity that you cannot and do not ever want to escape from. And it roots you so strongly in the desire to be a vessel of God's love and to be something for God that you are free from so much that used to plague you. Grace is the best news that Christians have to give. Let's be graceful people. Let's give grace to people. Let's speak words to grace. Hold ourselves accountable to grace. Stand up because we have been given grace. Believe in ourselves because we've been given grace. And hope for other people because they've been given grace. Listen this morning to a word from God to you.